Alrighty, everybody, here we go. We are live with another round of Astro-Babble with me. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to talk about. So basically, the format of the show, the live stream, is I have 8 charts that everybody has lovingly sent in to me. Thank you, everybody who has sent in their birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private messenger. And we will be going over those birth charts so that we can talk a little bit about astrology, a little bit about personal stuff, and really get to know what it is that the planets say about us via the natal chart. Hey, Sandy. Hey, Jess, jumping on. Thank you so much for watching. We do need more charts. So if you have friends, family, pets that you would like to have on the show, on the live stream, feel free to send me their information. Yes, I can do pets. Yes, I can do babies. I just need, again, birth date, place, and exact birth time, and that will allow me to run the natal chart. So let's go ahead and get to those charts, shall we? And we will get to it. If you'd like to schedule a personal consult, you can always reach out or visit ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Okay, first chart up is going to be Moses. Moses was born at 3:02 a.m. in Yauco, Puerto Rico. Okay, so we need to be a little bit specific about Moses's chart because that ascendant is at 0 degrees of Pisces. So if that birth chart is not 100% accurate, we need to be very, very aware because that can change the entire dynamic of the chart. However, having a Pisces ascendant means that Jupiter is the lord of the chart. Always a good sign when a benefic planet, especially regal Jupiter, is lord of the chart. We have Jupiter in Capricorn up in the 11th. Jupiter is not really great in Capricorn. We also have Neptune here in Capricorn up in the 11th house of friendships. So highly identifying with one's tribe, one's social circle, finding one's peers, one's friends, and the friendship circle being very, very important to Moses. However, that friendship circle is a little bit interesting because we've got Jupiter, lord of the chart, in the sign of his detriment, which is Capricorn. So that expansive principle of Jupiter hates to be confined into Capricorn. So one of the things that Moses might notice is that his friends tend to be rather restricted. Like he tends to notice how people are playing it small. He tends to notice how people are kind of getting in their own way from a Neptune and Capricorn perspective, that kind of wishy-washy state, that half asleep, half awake state, and part of his makeup is kind of to work within that space personally to help people understand their full potential, the full potential of the tribe, as it were. Oh, that's fun. That's fun as well. That means we've got the 10th house in Sagittarius with the moon here. Absolutely wonderful. And the moon is being ruled by Jupiter, the lord of the chart. That's great. Good for the personality, great for the business. Also means lucky in business, lucky success, career stuff. We do have the South Node, the MC, and Uranus here. Whenever Uranus touches the moon, there is a bit of unpredictable emotion energy that comes forward, a little bit of that kind of cataclysmic, earth-shattering emotional state that tends to turn on a dime because of that mutable Sagittarius energy. The MC is here, though, all like good success, but success that really tends to rock Moses's world. And success it's not something that Moses really came up here to learn in this lifetime because the South Node is present. We can see that success from a life achievement standpoint isn't ideal for Moses. It's something that he's already mastered. It's not a skill that needs to be focused on really. Instead, it's something that he's good at, he has a natural tendency for, but he's working on the opposite house, that 4th house of home and family. which is being ruled by Mercury in Taurus in the third. Mercury is retrograde. It is in Taurus, an earth sign, so a Mercury that slowed down and weighed down. But it is ruling that fourth house of family where the North Node is present. So one of Moses's goals in this life is to really master the family dynamic, specifically a family that revolves around teaching, that revolves around communication, passing on knowledge to the next generation. That's a big part of Moses's life, which is hilarious because we just had a conversation via Messenger the other day about teaching in the family dynamic. So that's fun. But because wherever the North Node is placed in the chart, we find that that's going to be one of the major life goals, and where a person is striving towards becoming their highest self in this life experience. Because that's the fourth house of family. We find that the family influence is very strong in terms of life path, but also family being ruled by the third house of writing, teaching, communication. What else do we see? We have Mars in Scorpio retrograde up in the ninth. We also have Saturn in Scorpio retrograde up in the ninth, and Pluto in Scorpio retrograde up in the ninth. All three of those placements not necessarily ideal, because the ninth house is the house of travel, foreigners, and higher learning. That topic is innately toxic to Moses. When we look at the drive to learn is very, very passionate, but everywhere that learning takes place is potentially toxic, or seeing the flaws in that structure as soon as it's approached. Saturn in Scorpio retrograde in the ninth often represents a very authoritative figure that kind of crushes the dreams of the student, I find. So that could be very prevalent in Moses's travel, foreigners, education space, but then also the idea of Pluto being here. Travel isn't something that is in the cards for Moses long term. That will unwind, but when it comes to short term travel, until we learn how to work with this Mars backwards energy and this Saturn backwards energy up in that ninth house, that's going to be a little bit of a tricky placement for Moses to unlock. However, that Mars is ruling his second house of finance, where his Sun in Aries and his Venus in Aries are located. Great for finances, but like I said, we have those Venus flytraps that are in the ninth house. So travel would potentially be lucrative, but there also may be some toxic, abusive, or oppressive elements to that ninth house dynamic as well. Because Venus in the second is ruling the eighth, there is a good potential for making money from death, from taxes and estates, inheritance, but also entrepreneurship. And we find a double entrepreneurship hit with Jupiter ruling that 10th house and Jupiter ruling the ascendant. Also, that Sun in Leo, that Sun in Aries ruling his sixth Leo house of work. Workaholic tendencies, tends to work all day long, but also gains a lot of satisfaction, a lot of egoic satisfaction from the work that Moses does. So I think that's part of the overall dynamic. Sun is exalted in Aries, very strong personal planet sign. To have Venus here as well, out of combustion, really, really nice. It's a tempered Aries. It's a beautiful Aries. It's an Aries that loves life and is kind of like the ram with the fluff, not necessarily that cold-hearted ram that's just headbutting everything in sight. Although it is ruled by that Mars in Scorpio retrograde with all the other retrograde planets in the ninth, I think that if we don't express that Mars appropriately, if we don't express that aggression as well as that Saturnian authority figure appropriately up in the ninth, that we might find some issues with finance, with travel, potentially coming to harm overseas as well. Yeah. So that's a little bit about Moses's chart. We've got a lot of stuff. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your things. Yes, there's a lot happening here. We've got a lot of messages. Thank you. Yes, send in your birth date, place, and time to me, and I will add you to the list. We've got, you'd be on tomorrow if you send it to me, so definitely send it, because otherwise we're going to have to start spacing these out from a daily to a more weekly schedule. But I'm enjoying them. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. Yes, if you would like to schedule a private consult, you can always do so, scorpiorisingastrology.com, or classes as well. We're going live on Facebook, which is Sam Bellier, or Instagram, which is Scorpio Rising Astrology. Okay. Chart number two. Chart number two is Jess. Jess was born at 8:04 a.m. in Baltimore. Let's take a look at Jess's chart. Scorpio rising, fabulous, absolutely lovely. Lovely. Pluto in the first house, awesome. Lots of powerful Scorpio energy. We've talked about that in previous sessions as well, but the idea that Scorpio energy is enhanced by Pluto in the first house makes you very deep, very intuitive, being that spider on the web, able to pull on the threads of the universe to understand their design, but also to manipulate their orientation. Really, really great. However, oh, that's fun. That's fun. That first house of Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Gemini in the 8th. That's mediumship qualities right there. Love that. Absolutely lovely. Mars ruling the first immediately is the Lord of the chart. Wherever the Lord of the chart is, we can find that house's qualities kind of seep into the personality. That 8th house is the house of death, taxes, estates, as well as business. Mars in Gemini also has a good, quick communication quality. The will tends to be a little bit all over the place because Gemini is mutable air, but it works out in your favor. We do have a Libra stellium, though, that I'd like to talk about. So we have Venus in Libra, which is great. We have Mercury in Libra, conjoining Venus. We have the Moon in Libra, which is also at 23 degrees conjoining, not exact conjoining, but almost exact conjoining Venus and Mercury, as well as the Sun in Libra as well. All in the 12th house of hidden enemies, as well as hospitalizations and karmic healing. So that's cool stuff. We've got the sun here and the moon here, so she's a new moon baby, all in Libra. Libra is that sign of fairness, and whenever we see a Libra stellium in the 12th house is somebody we've had this a couple times actually on the forecast, not forecast on the in the charts. That Libra stellium really talks about somebody who's over-identified with the idea of making sure that everything is fair. Social justice warrior is a good way to think about it, especially with Venus here ruling that 12th house. In that 12th house, it's somebody who, best way to say it would be like that Legally Blonde archetype, where Venus comes into that legal environment with everything dolled up, very, very pretty, and is just able to kind of get the bad guys with a smile, is a good way to think about it. Mercury is also here in Libra, making the 12th house very communicative, very comfortable talking about and thinking about 12th house topics like death, like hospitalizations. Again, would do very well. Nursing, hospice, working with the dead, that's something that comes naturally in Jess's chart. It is something, though, that I find a lot of people struggle with, especially with these placements earlier on in life. When somebody comes in to see me for an astrology consult and I see these placements, stelliums naturally are difficult because they force us at an early age to really come to grips with intense skills that should be mastered over the lifetime. It's kind of like juicing somebody up with a lot of power and then not telling them how to use it. And that's kind of what stelliums are. And she's got this Libra stellium in the 12th, where she kind of has come in with all of these justice qualities, justifying the unjust and that kind of thing. But she hasn't really been taught how to express those things therapeutically. But I think actually because that sun in Libra is ruling Jupiter and Leo in the 10th, she actually has great potential to make a good career out of it too. But again, if she's not pursuing a field that allows her to enact justice for the unjust, that doesn't allow her to use her detective qualities, then you'd be a great cop, Jess, for sure. Or a mortician, somebody who works in that CSI field where you're able to use your intuition and your work with the dead to actually help justice kind of perpetuate, kind of like a psychic medium, or somebody who is able to create that that embodiment of what it means to straddle both realms, but also to pull information from both. Good stuff. Let's see, what else do we want to see? I mean, that Jupiter in Leo is really just screaming at me. Because Jupiter in Leo is ruled by the sun, we've got the sun here in the 12th, which whenever we see the Lord of the Ascendant or the sun in the 12th, there's going to be self-consciousness issues. There's going to be a lot of self-deprecation. There's going to be a lot of negative self-talk just in general. But that Jupiter in Leo being ruled by the sun does help with that. The only issue is we need to make sure that the career and the work that you do really helps to pull out those traits in you that you don't see in yourself. So I think that that's one of the benefits of working in that field. Excuse me, there it is. I've been waiting for that sneeze for like 5 minutes. So yeah, that's where Jess, I think, seems to shine, is taking all of that intense Scorpio energy, working in the legal field, and then creating that space for people to open up in a way that only she can help them open up. Good stuff. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining on. I appreciate you very, very much. Okay, third chart of the day. We have Ella. Ella was born February 4th. February 4th, not January, February 4th, not the other way around, not April 2nd. That was a funny little mishap. We've got Ella was also born at 12:04 a.m. in Oxford. Let's take a look at Ella's chart. Excuse me, goodness, got the sneezels this morning. We have that Scorpio ascendant at 0 degrees. If again that ascendant can move super, super fast, everybody, and that's why that exact birth time is so important. We can't not have that exact birth time because the ascendant is so finicky. Just 45 minutes in either direction at somebody, and the ascendant totally sways. But at 0 degrees especially, a couple minutes, like 5-10 minutes, and that ascendant shifts. What do we got? We have Neptune in Scorpio conjunct the ascendant. That's always fun. So chemical sensitivities right off the bat. The body, especially the large intestine, bladder, reproductive sinus areas for Ella, very, very sensitive to chemicals. The body is prone to hyperreaction when we look at things like caffeine, things like alcohol, things like medication in general. Whenever we see Neptune in the first house, it always talks to me about the hormones being really wishy-washy, the ability to process mind-altering substances not necessarily being great. So just take that into account, Ella, and really understand that that's part of your physical makeup. That's not something that everybody has. Not everybody can only take like half an aspirin and get double the dosage effects of it. Like that's unique to your body constitution, your type. We do have the ascendant being opposed by Mars. Mars is in Taurus over in the 7th. So we've talked about this, especially in the first round of videos, when we've looked at other people's chart. The ascendant at 0 degrees being opposed by the Lord of the ascendant in the 7th house. Relationships being in conflict and over-identification with those relationships. Not necessarily ideal to see in a natal chart reading. When we see the body and the mind of the person having this conflict where the Lord of the chart, the planet that represents the individual in that chart, is naturally opposing the ascendant, the point of the personality, where the whole chart is kind of revolving around, that Mars and Taurus is going to be difficult relationships due to traits like stubbornness, due to traits like getting explosively angry, although Mars and Taurus is tempered. Yeah, it still has that rage, that bull-like rage. Like once your partner sees red, Ella, ooh, it is all over for sure. Like not okay, all over. So there's a lot of stuff there that we need to unpack in terms of relationships. Let's look to Venus for that, because Venus is ruling that 7th that seventh house. Venus is down in Capricorn in the third, along with Mercury in Capricorn in the third. It's a fun little placement. Venus being in the third, Mercury being in the third. Mercury loves to be in the third because it is a planet of communication, and that third house is a house of communication, writing, teaching. But because both planets are in Capricorn, their energies are slightly focused, more restricted, slightly suppressed. And when we see that third house connected to that seventh house, there's going to be a connection between your relationships and that writing, teaching, communication. You may marry a writer, marry a teacher, have a long-term partnership, or have somebody who helps you to write a book, especially if you write a book with your spouse. That would be a good expression of that chart placement. But because the Lord of the chart is in that seventh house opposing the ascendant, that's probably the most noticeable aspect of your chart that I really think should be focused on and understood, really, and unpacked. We do have the sun in Aquarius in the fourth, being ruled by Saturn in Sagittarius in the second. So when we see the sun in the fourth, that automatically says to me that the ego is safe at home. There's a homebody tendency where there's a lot of learning that happens at home. There's a lot of personal growth that happens at home because Aquarius is known for that. There's a lot of tinkering that happens at home. But the sun is safe at home, and the sun prefers to be in that fourth house of family where everything comes together and everything is just kind of generally low key. But because that fourth house is ruled by Saturn in Sagittarius, we do have that Saturn house ruling the fourth. So love, especially when it comes to family early in life, might have been lacking, might have felt a little bit distant, especially because of money issues, because Saturn is in the second house of finance. Saturn is not a great planet to have in the second house of finance because Saturn tends to be restrictive. Saturn tends to bring a lack. Saturn tends to mature over time, for sure. Like around that first Saturn return, 28, 29-ish, we have a lot of really good fruition that Saturn brings forward. But in the meantime, Saturn tends to, for the first 30 years of life, especially when connected with the family house, bring the idea that the family wasn't able to financially support Ella, wasn't able to financially support because of hospitalizations or medical issues, because that Jupiter in Libra in the 12th is ruling that Saturn in Sagittarius in the second, which is then ruling the sun in Aquarius in the fourth. So we see how all those planets kind of link and interplay. Especially when we look at the creativity aspect, we do have that moon in Pisces at 29 degrees, just on that cusp in the fifth house of creativity, sexuality, and parenting. Interesting when we see that moon placement in the fifth does bring natural creativity, does bring a natural sense of spirituality because of Pisces. But because the moon is opposing Jupiter, just by a couple degrees, not by sign, but just by a couple degrees, and they're both kind of on the cusp. I'd say that again, back to that medical issue, back to the hospitalizations, there might have been issues with pursuing creativity due to health-related issues, especially involving parents or things that were outside of the control due to that opposition with Jupiter in the house of hidden enemies. Let's see. Yeah, from a career perspective, I think one of the things that's intimately connected to Ella's career houses is we have that Mars ruling the sixth house of work. So back to the idea of partnerships being very important to the work dynamic, but also that Sun in Aquarius is ruling the 12th house in Leo, which has Uranus, which has the MC, which also has Pluto. Pluto and Uranus are also retrograde, the sun opposing those natally by sign. There's a lot of conflict between wanting to stay at home, wanting to be that homebody, wanting to be just alone and with your own thoughts, doing your own thing, and the need to actually be out in the spotlight. That will get easier as you get older, especially halfway through the life over 50, which we're already at that point. But when we look at Ella's chart, it's something that has kind of grown on Ella. It's not something that's been easy, but something that has been necessary, bringing people into the home or taking that that self out of the home and bringing that into the 10th house, into the public eye, or working from home, again, bringing people from the outside to appreciate Ella's talents in the home. That's part of the dynamic right off the bat. Good stuff. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. All of your comments. I love, love, love that you're sending in birthplaces, dates, and times. If you'd like to be a part of the forecast, please feel free. The forecast, I keep saying forecast. It's not a forecast. It's kind of like a live reading of sorts. We've been doing this for the past 12 days. This is day 13. Goodness gracious. 8 charts a day for the past while. Let's keep it going because we're just about halfway through and we're not exactly halfway through. Let's talk about Sandy. Sandy, born at 11:20 a.m. in Detroit. We've got that ascendant in Gemini being ruled by Mercury in Pisces up in the 10th. So when we see the ascendant ruled by Gemini making Mercury the lord of the chart, Mercury is a communicator. Mercury is a linguist. Mercury rules the 3 M's: magic, medicine, and money. So when we look at the ascendant being ruled by that planet and putting that planet in the 10th house of career, career success is something that's very, very important to Sandy, but especially career in those communicative terms. We do have the MC, the Sun, and Jupiter all in the 10th house. So that's a really fun mix of just super duper success because Jupiter is in its right sign and it's ruling that 10th house of career. That's a really good career placement for Sandy. I really, really enjoy that. I think that's a super positive way to kick off the chart. There's just a lot of good stuff happening in the career house for sure, especially with the lord of the chart being in that 10th house of career and Jupiter, the luckiest planet in astrology, being in that 10th house of career in its proper sign, ruling the sun, that planet of ego and identification. A lot of really good stuff there, Sandy. Love that 10th house energy from you. We do have Saturn in Aquarius and Venus in Aquarius, both in that 9th house. The 9th house is the house of higher learning, travel, and foreigners. When we look at that 9th house specifically having Saturn in it, travel is not something that Sandy does particularly well or did not do for the first 30 years of her life because of Saturn being that slow to grow sign. But because Saturn is in that 9th house, one of the things that I see a lot with Saturn in the 9th is somebody who identifies as a lifelong learner, somebody who's constantly looking to improve, somebody who's constantly looking to grow in a steady way, but also in an eccentric way. Aquarius does bring that slight mad scientist energy to the table. So it's not necessarily the practical things that Sandy's interested in. It's always those niche things that nobody else is talking about that she finds super fascinating. Venus is here though. So wherever Venus touches, there's bound to be good luck. There's bound to be prosperity. There's bound to be healing. There's bound to be just a little bit of extra grace. We do have that moon in Libra. That moon in Libra is at 29 degrees, though. It's right on the cusp of that 5th house, which does bring some creativity, does bring parenting, does bring sexuality to the table in terms of emotional attachment. But because that moon is being ruled by Libra, that moon is in Libra, being ruled by Venus in Aquarius in the 9th house of travel, wouldn't surprise me if children being attached to that communication, to that college space, children moving far away for college, children and parents especially being in the education space, because that 5th house of parents, children, sexuality, creativity is attached to that 9th house of travel, foreigners, and communication. Children, parents learning foreign languages, you learning foreign languages because that moon is in that creative house attached to the 9th. I think that's a really interesting dynamic of how you get your rocks off kind of intellectually is a good way to say it, that summary. The sun in the 10th is ruling that third house of writing, teaching, communication. We also have Mars in Leo here, retrograde, which poses a little bit of a confidence issue. When we see Mars retrograde, it always means that that will is going backwards. That will is kind of retreating into itself. But Mars is still in Leo, a fire sign, which is great. And it's being ruled by the sun in the 10th of career. So overall, you can't escape the writing, teaching, communication part of your work, Sandy, despite that will being hesitant, despite that will being kind of retreating backwards, trying to get into its little nest. There's no way, because the sun keeps pulling it out to play in that 10th house of career. There's no way to escape that fate of that third house. That Lord of the chart, Mercury in Pisces at 7 degrees up in the 10th, is being besieged by an opposition to Pluto and Uranus in Virgo down in the 4th. Family issues, specifically, working working within the field of the parents. So when we see that 4th house connected to the 10th, the private life of home and family is connected to the 10th house of career. But because there is a very strong opposition, there is a negative conflict there. There is an idea that parents might interfere in the work. There is an idea that family might be a little bit toxic towards the field that is chosen. There might be an idea of unpredictability in the home affecting the work life or career, and not necessarily making the career jumps that you need to make because of the family situation, because Pluto and Uranus are both retrograde, and that Virgo, that very nitpicky sign. So that's just something to be aware of. But the moon in Libra is ruling that 2nd house of finance. So anything that you're creatively inspired to do, hey, it's gonna work out good for you in the end, financially at least. So that's super fun. Yeah, good stuff. Alrighty. So that's fun. Dad as a professor, lovely. Cool. So that's Sandy's chart. Again, if you would like to be added to the queue, please feel free to let me know. We've only got a couple names for tomorrow, so if you submit now, you'll be able to be on tomorrow's cast. If we don't get enough, I'll just delay it until we get the full 8, because I really enjoy these hour sessions. I think that they're super fun the way that they're panning out. Let's go to Jessica. Jessica was born at 4:28 p.m. in Melbourne. Okie dokie. We've got that 2-degree Pisces ascendant, which again makes Jupiter the Lord of the chart. Another Jupiter day. Huh, weird. So we've got Jupiter as Lord of the chart. Jupiter is in its exaltation in Cancer. Woo, lovely. Extra points to Jess. Actually, this is a flavor that we saw yesterday on the live stream, because Jessica has put her Pisces and Cancer in that 5th house of parenting, family, sexuality, children. So it wouldn't surprise me if from a life perspective, and also down the road, like children, her body is very fertile. Children are very much in her chart, and not just any children, like a lot of children, because Jupiter is ruling the chart and Jupiter is in that 5th house of family. There's just a lot there in terms of the body being very childbearing, the body being very fertile, and enjoying that idea of parenting as well. Jupiter is exalted in Pisces. Like there's so much good juju here. It's crazy. And your North Node is here, so there's a lot of like life direction stuff when it comes to learning about that 5th house. Part of your job in this lifetime, Jessica, is to understand the nuance of that 5th house, of what it means to be a mom, what it means to be a parent, what it means to have children, what it means to awaken sexually, what it means to stoke your creative fires. There's just a lot of juice in that 5th house that I think is really, really delicious, because you've put Jupiter here in its exaltation, the strongest sign it can possibly be in. That's a boatload of good luck if you stick to those places and those resources. Mm-hmm. However, we do have that North Node, South Node having a Mars issue. Mars is in Capricorn, opposing that North Node. One of the things that sucks about Jessica's chart is that Mars is opposing the North Node. So Mars, we talked about already, is kind of like that planet that wants to like do stuff. It wants to take action. It wants to really like be a part of, especially that social dynamic. And it It wants to be a part of that social dynamic because that Mars in Capricorn is in the 11th house of friendships and social groups. So despite all of that energy being in the fifth house and the chart ruler being in that fifth house of family, and you're just such a good mom, Jessica, like mom is in your chart. However, there is this Mars drive that opposes that. That's just like, let's go out, let's do stuff, let's make friends, let's create space, let's really work on community activities. Like, no, you're you're a mom. That's kind of the crux of your chart. And you're not just a mom, you're like a really great mom, honey. You've got that moon in Leo conjoining Venus in Leo in the sixth house of work. Again, stellar compassion placements for sure, especially because that is a health house as well. You'd be a really great caregiver from a professional standpoint. Oh my God, and Jupiter is ruling your 10th house of career. Get out, Jess, get out. You've got so much good stuff in your chart. Kind of jealous. So when we look at Venus being in that sixth house and the moon being in that sixth house, there's an attachment to work. There's a love of work. And I think that really comes from the idea of, parenting being in your blood, really. The moon is in Virgo in the seventh house of relationships. Not a great space for it to be in, but it's not necessarily terrible. It is being ruled by Mercury in the eighth. But the sun is ruling that sixth house of work, career, health. So the idea that your spouse will also be in the same field as you, or you'll meet him through your workplace, him or her spouse, depending. The person that you choose to spend your life with will be intimately connected to your sixth house of work, health, and pets. You might marry a vet. Who knows? That's the fun part of astrology, is we can give you definitions, but how life chooses to play out might be a little bit off key from the exact definition. Because that seventh house is connected to that eighth house, there is a little bit of an issue as well. Oh, well. Oh, yeah. Huh. Yeah, so we have the sun in Virgo being ruled by Mercury in Libra, which is then ruled by Venus in Leo, which is ruled by the sun in Virgo. So we've got a chain between your sixth, seventh, and eighth houses. So the eighth house, death, taxes, estates, business. The seventh house, relationships. And that sixth house, work, health, pets, all connected. So it might be interesting as you explore your relationship dynamic, how your spouses tend to work in different worlds. They often have multiple businesses. They might be entrepreneurs that have investments in a lot of different things, just because Virgo and Mercury are part of it. But there is that idea of Leo also in the sixth house, technically working with famous or working in fame specifically, or marrying somebody who has that Leo energy where everybody's just super charismatic. The one thing that I really think is important to talk about in your chart is your Pluto placement up in Sagittarius in the 10th. So because that 10th house is being ruled by Jupiter in the 5th, like again, you'd be really good at childcare, you'd be a really good mom, that kind of stuff. But Pluto in the 10th house of career is something that's only going to mature halfway through life. So we've got that 10th house of career not necessarily being clear, potentially being toxic. In that first half of life, where you're like, I really just don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I'm really good at these things, but talent doesn't necessarily equal fulfillment. And really, should I be doing all these things, or should I not be? Like, am I on the right track? Let me tell you that if you stick within that fifth house topic of creativity, children, parenting, sexuality, you'll be on the right track, Jess. There's no doubt about it. Whether or not you feel fully in your power is a different story, but we have to kind of let life mature. Yeah, good stuff. Thank you everybody for all your comments. Thank you everybody who's jumping on. We're just over halfway through, I think, and we're just over halfway through the cast. So there's lots of good stuff. We're staying on time. Lovely. Oh, now we get to talk about Matteo. I'm so excited to talk about Matteo, the little bambino. So Matteo was born recently, and was born at 3:54 a.m. in Scarborough. So let's look at Matteo. Libra ascendant being ruled by Venus and Sagittarius, co-present with Jupiter and Sagittarius in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. Interesting. So you've got a writer on your hands, a writer, a teacher, a communicator, somebody who's going to be very, very vocal. Because we have both benefics as well in the third house, that's excellent. We've got Venus and Sag, we've got Jupiter and Sag. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. In that third house of writing, teaching, communication. That's some extra good juju when it comes to being a teacher, being a writer, being a communicator. It's a really great placement to have, especially with the Lord of the chart being in the third. So nourish the writing, nourish the teaching, nourish the communication. Maybe, let's see, where else does Venus rule? Venus rules that 8th house of death, taxes, estates, business. So might be really good to consider that as a secondary career as well. Estate planning, legal work, anything with the written word or documenting our contracts is going to be really good for Mateo. We do something to be aware of. We do have that moon in Virgo in the 12th. So there is an emotional tendency to be withdrawn. Despite the talent, Libra ascendants are interesting because whenever Libra graces the ascendant and whenever Venus rules the chart, there's a beauty to the body, to the self, to the personality that I think is really clear to see in a lot of people who have strong Libra placements connected to the ascendant or the sun. So having the ascendant as being very beautiful and having this really great placement in the third does not counterbalance the fact that the emotions are compromised in the 12th house. So we have that moon in Virgo, which is a naturally very emotionally picky sign. Virgo, having the moon in Virgo is kind of like the moon saying, "Ooh, what are these feelings? What are these things? What is this grossness that I'm experiencing? You mean I have to have these for the rest of my life? Like what? Ew, nasty. I feelings are gross. They can't be put in a box. They can't be cleaned. I can't disinfect feelings." And that can be a little bit of an issue with Mateo growing up. Emotional wellness is going to be very important. So when we look at, as the gifts start to come forward and as beauty is recognized, there might be this counterbalance in Mateo's chart that comes forward where he emotionally withdraws. He potentially gets a little bit emotionally toxic as well. So working on the feelings, and I think writing will help to discharge that for sure. But working on the feelings as part of how the chart needs to be rectified is part of the makeup. That moon is being ruled by Mercury in Scorpio in the second house, as well as Mars in Scorpio is here, and the sun is in Scorpio. Scorpio babies are fun. You never know who they are because they're always changing shape according to what is best suited at the time. But they always have this quick intellect and precision, especially with Mercury. And Mercury in Scorpio is also not necessarily a place that I like to see Mercury. I don't like to see the moon in Virgo. I don't like to see Mercury in Scorpio just because the moon doesn't know how to handle, or Virgo can't handle the moon, rather, and Mercury can't handle Scorpio. Having a Scorpio mind is kind of like having a mind that's naturally equipped with darkness. And having the moon there might be some like starving artist mentality. Like we have a little bit of an Edgar Allan Poe paradox that's coming forward. I think if we allow the talent and allow the beauty to manifest fully, then that will be heavily mitigated. But if there's too much attention in the spotlight, then this Scorpio side will start to reveal itself more and more and more. We just need to be aware that hiding is not good. Keeping secrets is not good, despite it being the default. Mars and Scorpio in the second house of finance does bring like really, really good prosperity juju, kind of a headhunter mentality when it comes to gaining money and being fiscally responsible. Mercury and Scorpio in the second, a great mind for money. Sun in Scorpio identifying very heavily with money. So if we allow Mateo to start focusing on the negative, to start focusing on the aspects of life that potentially deal with negative expressions of power, or feeling that Scorpio energy start to rise and bubble. That's going to take away from the Libra ascendant. It's going to really compromise that Virgo moon a little bit. So I think mental health, emotional health, understanding power and material possessions, money is not everything, is going to be a really important phrase to remind Mateo of, because we access the beauty in his chart through his Venus placement in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, not in that hoarding place in the second house of finance, or in that emotional space in the 12th. That's a little bit of a confusing space for him to be in. Also, he's not going to want to stick to a schedule. No schedule whatsoever, constantly will be late for everything, because that Neptune in Pisces is in that 6th house of work, and Neptune in Pisces is retrograde. That's tough break. But he will be able to use his emotional state to fuel his career, because that moon in Virgo is ruling that 10th house of career. Good stuff. Mateo's pretty interesting too, despite being a couple years old. Let's go ahead and check up on him maybe as those talents start to develop. Yeah, and we'll work with what we find as we find it. Cool. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in. Let's keep going down the line with the charts. I think we have one or two more before we wrap up. Yeah, we've got two more. Kathleen, actually, you're just in time. We're just about to do your chart. So Kathleen was born 10:40 a.m. in Oswego, something like that. Let's take a look at Kathleen's chart. I'm looking. What do we see? We see a Capricorn ascendant, which naturally flavors. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so we've got. This is what we need to talk about in regards to astrology. So everybody knows their sun sign. Yeah, everybody knows their sun sign. But very few people know their moon sign and their rising sign. Some people know all three if they've been to an astrologer or run their chart. When it comes to astrology, we really need to look at the ascendant as the most important. Moon and sun are secondary to the ascendant, but we've got that ascendant in Capricorn. We've also got the moon in Pisces, the sun in Scorpio. So there are a lot of really interesting dynamics to Kathleen's chart. All tend to be rather reclusive, all tend to be rather stoic and emotional. Stoic on the outside, emotional on the inside is a good way to think about it. She's got this hard exterior and this really, really overly soft, gushy, sensitive interior. That's not necessarily easy for people to penetrate, especially with Saturn and Aquarius in the second house. Boom, boom. That's a good placement. Saturn in the financial house doesn't really do good for finances, but Saturn in Aquarius in the financial house in a day chart actually does really well for finances over time. So mastering the art and science of money is something that Kathleen will need to work on throughout her life. She's also got Venus and Libra in the 10th, 2 Venus Libra placements. That's fun. So we've got Venus and Libra up in the 10th. Venus and Libra in the 10th talks about a career in beauty, potentially working in a profession that is fashion, working in a profession that is art, working in a profession that is voice, allowing that beauty placement to shine throughout the career part of the chart, and finding great value in the aestheticness that Venus and Libra brings forward. We do have Mercury and Sagittarius in the 12th. Again, whenever we see something in the 12th, there's a tendency for that aspect of the life to be hidden or compromised, because the 12th is the place of hidden enemies or hospitalizations. So Mercury in the 12th tends to compromise the mind. Sagittarius is a sign that's known to have an ideal. Yeah. One of the things that Mercury and Sagittarius in the 12th, I've seen this a couple times before. It's a sign and a placement that I associate with toxic positivity. is a good way to think about it. The mind's tricking you into things being better than they actually are, or being addicted to that mental state of, if we just keep positive, if we just keep positive, if we just surround it in white light. Like, there's not enough white light in the world, honey. I'm so sorry. But there is beauty in the world, and there's a difference. Yeah. Beauty does not necessarily need to be nice all the time. There can be fierce beauty. Yeah. So it's not necessarily wrapping everything in bubble wrap and cotton candy, but it is understanding that, blood can be beautiful, guts can be beautiful, vulnerability can be beautiful, chaos can be beautiful. It's not always about having that ideal kind of Camelot version, white picket fence of what everything should be all the time. We do have that 11th house and that 9th house connected, which is interesting. Sun in Scorpio conjunct Neptune in Scorpio. Boo, not really a fan of that placement, but the people that Kathleen normally associates with are going to have that Scorpio tendency. She also very much identifies with her tribe. She likes the underbelly of the world. She likes people who are versed in trauma and people who have that mysterious character about them. She's attracted to the bad boys and girls of the world. And potentially, because we see Neptune and Scorpio in the 11th, the idea that friends would introduce her to toxic substances. So they might, in an early age, be offered alcohol or cigarettes at an early age, drugs at an early age, by her social group, her peers, because she tends to surround herself with those Scorpio individuals. All of that 11th house friendship stuff is being ruled by the 9th. So another characteristic of her friendships is that they are all very learned people. They're not just the baseline of Scorpio in terms of the dark, deep, broody side of Scorpio. They're also well learned. Scorpio people. They're people that are often in higher education. They have traveled extensively. Even making friends with people overseas, very, very easy for Kathleen. But we do have Uranus and Pluto here in the 9th. So there is a little bit of toxic tendency and unpredictability in that 9th house of foreigners and higher education. So college, probably not the best experience for you personally. Also, the idea of travel being a rather chaotic space for you to navigate in. It's not necessarily ideal for your chart. So I would not be eager to see you travel unless it was something that you did for health reasons, or it was something that you did because it was an absolute necessity, because you tend to expose a little bit of the weaknesses in your chart when you travel. Again, like beauty industry stuff, really, really strong in your chart. Very, very interesting, because we've got that Venus in Libra up in the 10th, but then we've also got it ruling Jupiter in Taurus, which is retrograde, but still not bad. Down in the 5th house of parenting, sexuality, creativity. Just really, really good stuff. Also makes you very fertile from a fertility perspective, from a medical astrology perspective. Jupiter in the 5th house, we've seen that a couple times over the past couple days. Children definitely in the chart for you. Although Jupiter is retrograde, it's still being ruled by Venus and Libra, which is a very fertile, abundant planetary placement. And we've got just, Venus loves to be creative. Jupiter likes to make things big. That 10th house, 5th house career and creativity, getting along, like makeup, jewelry, fashion, like that's where a lot of your placements are really asking you to go. And because you have that Capricorn ascendant being ruled by Saturn and Aquarius in the 2nd, you'd be really, really good at budgeting for these fashion projects, working for pricing for perfume companies or makeup lines, being that voice of reason to people who tend to let their creativity get away from them. You would be able to have the eye that is so valued in that appearance-based industry, but you would also be able to ground it in practicality and bring forward a lot of the really nuanced but very focused parts of your chart. So that's fun. Good stuff. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping on. We've got one more chart and about 7-8 minutes to do it. So let's go ahead and run through this last chart, and then we will be done for the day. Again, I'm running out of charts, so if you would like to submit yours, you'll probably be featured tomorrow at this rate, and we will we'll get to it. Let's look at Emilio. Emilio was born at 4 p.m. In Portugal. We do have an Aries ascendant at 6 degrees, meaning Mars is the lord of the chart. Mars is up in Sagittarius, up in the 9th house of travel, foreigners, and higher education. So the idea of Emilio working specifically in the higher education field, in travel, working with foreigners extensively, is part of Emilio's background. It wouldn't surprise me if I see this a lot, especially with Mars being associated with the ascendant, traveling for the military, working within the military, but then also working in flight, working in travel, working for tour companies, being a travel agent, that kind of thing, pilot, anything where the lord of the ascendant being in the 9th really talks about a lot of education, a lot of travel, and interacting with foreign cultures. That's where the heart of your chart really lies. Speaking of the heart of the chart, we also have Venus in Sagittarius and Mercury in Sagittarius, all in that 9th. So the 9th house is pretty stacked with the idea that your mind's here. You've got Venus adding extra loveliness here. There's just a lot of good stuff in the travel house for you. So when we look at how you might find happiness in life, how you might kind of go with the flow of life, anything that involves you traveling to foreign countries, learning more, and or interacting with foreign culture is definitely going to unlock a lot of your good placements. We do have Mars also ruling that 8th house of death, taxes, estates, business, and the Sun in Scorpio is here, as well as the Neptune in Scorpio is here. There are a couple placements that I've seen this before in, not necessarily great for live stream videos, but it does mean that there is this kind of itchy underbelly to Emilio when we look at the ego being in an 8th house, which is one of those houses that is naturally hidden in Scorpio, in the sign that is naturally hidden with Neptune here, which likes to hide things. So there is a lot of mystery. There is a lot of ambiguity in regards to Emilio's personality. There is a lot of men of mystery type energy to that space that Emilio has put in his 8th chart of death, taxes, estates. Adding to that men of mystery persona, we also have the moon in Pisces in the 12th, another place to hide a planet. So we've got a lot of really fun stuff with travel. It's almost like Emilio can't run far enough or fast enough to escape his own personality. That's a really interesting dynamic. I find that to be super interesting. Despite the only thing that he actually wants is to feel safe. Wow, that's really intense. We've got the moon in Pisces co-present with Saturn in Pisces retrograde in the 12th, ruling that 4th house of family with Jupiter here, but Jupiter is in Cancer and retrograde. So family trauma, family hospital trauma, the idea of that 12th house of hidden enemies being ruling that 4th house of family. So big family, but toxic family, family environment that he longed to escape, longed to travel away from, longed to get away far and fast from. That's a big part of Emilio's chart. He's not even going to really, he didn't realize how hidden those enemies were, how toxic those enemies were, or how to master his own emotions until he was about 30, when that Saturn came to fruition via the first Saturn return. Just not necessarily ideal for a life that is open, a life that is free. There are a lot of internal components to Emilio's chart that are hidden, that are disguised, that are potentially filled with trauma. But when we look at Ascendant Scorpio in the 8th, there's an idea that there's a natural part of the personality that will never be uncovered in Emilio's chart. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just there's this international spy component to Emilio's energy from his astrological makeup that makes him devilishly attractive to the travel, the foreigners, the higher education field, because he seems like he knows so much and he has all of these unique skills that nobody really sees what's under that coat, and he always keeps it hidden. So there's a lot of good stuff. And again, even Mercury in the 9th house of travel, education, and foreigners is ruling that 6th house of work. that's really what it all comes down to, is we have a lot of hidden stuff, we have a lot of underbelly, we have a lot of family drama, we have interesting things that make Emilio very, very fascinating, but also very, very dangerous under the right circumstances, because there's a lot that's hidden. But when we see things in the chart that are hidden, it's not just hidden from the outside world, it's also hidden from the inside world. And if we wrap things, if we put walls up, we have to recognize that those walls don't just keep people out, they also keep us from going out. So that's part of Emilio's chart that I would kind of just warn him about, is that we need to at some point take down those walls constructively, at certain points rebuild them, yeah, because not everybody needs to get into you at any given time, but understand that we can't have walls being permanent fixtures. There has to be a semi-permeable membrane to where you don't succumb to your own poison, as it were, which is something that I talk about with a lot of my Scorpio placements. With clients who have these issues, is, if we hold things inside too much, those things inside tend to ferment, tend to become toxic. And this is a chart where I would see a lot of that toxicity potentially becoming an issue, because again, if you're always on the road, if you're always traveling, if you're always learning, if you're always activating that Aries ascendant, that Sagittarius ruler, there's so much of you that can just be, yeah, I'll deal with it later, and that's a little bit dangerous. Yeah. Good stuff. Oh, goodness. So it looks like I'm still